What happens when you arrest someone for stolen valor, only to discover they're one of the most dangerous operators the military has ever produced? A quiet woman sits handcuffed in a crowded police station, surrounded by officers who mock her claims of being a Navy SEAL. They treat her like a liar, a joke, another fake trying to steal honor she never earned. But when a routine verification call triggers a federal lockdown and an armed SEAL commander storms the precinct demanding her release, the laughter dies. The officers who humiliated her are about to learn they didn't arrest a fraud. They arrested Iron Reaper. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you're ready for a story about hidden sacrifice and justice finally served, consider subscribing. Because what happens next will leave an entire precinct frozen in shock. It was just another Friday night at District 9, the kind where you process drunks, break up fights, and count down the hours until your shift ends. The booking area smelled like stale coffee and sweat under buzzing fluorescent lights. Phones rang constantly. A wall-mounted television played muted cable news. Officers moved through the chaos with practiced indifference, barely looking up as another patrol car pulled into the rear lot. That's when she walked in. Two patrol officers dragged a handcuffed woman through the side entrance. She was thin, almost fragile-looking, wearing a faded black jacket over a gray shirt, jeans worn at the knees, and scuffed boots that had seen better days. Her dark hair hung past her shoulders, partially covering her face. But it wasn't her appearance that made people stare. It was her expression, blank, empty, like she wasn't even there. Officer Joss Tambor was laughing as he guided her toward the booking desk, recounting the arrest to anyone within earshot. He was built like a linebacker, late 20s, the kind of cop who treated every shift like a performance. Detective Harlan Creel leaned back in his chair near the fingerprinting station, grinning as Tambor approached. So, this woman at Mulligan's, Total Dive Bar on 8th Street, she's sitting there telling war stories, talking about operations and classified missions. Someone asks what branch, and she says Navy SEAL. Creel's grin widened. A SEAL, her. She's like what, 120 pounds soaking wet. Tambor continued, enjoying the attention. Bartender asks for military ID. She says she can't discuss her service. Whole bar starts roasting her. She doesn't react, just sits there staring, creepy as hell. So, we bring her in for stolen valor. Stolen valor. It's when someone pretends to be military for attention, benefits, or respect they didn't earn. To the officers gathering around, she was just another fake trying to play hero. The woman said nothing, didn't defend herself, didn't even make eye contact. Her wrists were already red and raw from the cuffs, but she showed no discomfort, no anger, nothing. As they moved her toward the fingerprinting station, Tambor grabbed her left arm to position her hand on the scanner. That's when he noticed it, a long, precise scar running along her forearm. It wasn't self-harm. It wasn't a tattoo removal. It was surgical, clean, professional. The kind of scar you get from reconstructive work after serious trauma. He almost asked about it, then decided it wasn't worth the effort. Creel muttered something about Pinterest surgery gone wrong. The woman's eyes flicked toward him for just a fraction of a second. Cold. Empty. Like staring into a frozen lake. Then she looked away. Sergeant Rue Lindquist watched from her desk near the back wall. She was 52, with 22 years on the force, and she'd seen plenty of fake soldiers in her time. They all had tells. They were loud, defensive, eager to prove themselves with stories and excuses and manufactured outrage. This one was different. She sat on the metal bench in the booking room, hands folded in her lap, head slightly bowed, silent as a tomb. Lindquist gathered her clipboard and walked into the room, closing the door behind her. The woman didn't look up. Lindquist sat down across from her, studying her for a moment before speaking. Look, I'm not here to embarrass you. Just tell me the truth. Were you actually in the military? Silence. You understand this is a federal offense, right? Impersonating military personnel. You could do real time for this. Nothing. Not even a blink. Creel poked his head through the door, still grinning. She's not talking because she knows she's cooked. Probably watched a couple YouTube videos and thought she could pull it off. Tambor appeared behind him, pulling out his phone. Yo, this is going on social media. Girl boss SEAL wannabe gets busted. He aimed the camera at her. The woman's jaw tightened, barely perceptible, But she didn't look at the lens, didn't give them the satisfaction. Lindquist sighed and stood, leaving the woman alone with the two officers who now treated her like entertainment. A joke, a meme in the making. To them, she was guilty. The silence proved it. The refusal to provide identification proved it. Why else would someone stay quiet unless they had something to hide? Back at her desk, Lindquist laid out the woman's belongings on a tray. A worn leather wallet with no identification. $43 in cash. A cheap flip phone with no contacts saved. And a plain silver ring, smooth and unremarkable except for its weight. It felt heavier than it should. Lindquist turned it over in her fingers, then set it aside and picked up the intake form. Under emergency contact, it was blank. Under employer, blank. Under home address, blank. She frowned. Who has nothing? But Sergeant Lindquist was thorough. She always ran verification, just protocol. She picked up the phone and dialed Naval Personnel Command, expecting to be transferred to some clerk who would confirm what everyone already believed. That this woman had never served, that she was lying, that they'd caught another fake. The hold music played for 30 seconds. Then it cut off abruptly. A voice answered, sharp and clipped. Naval Special Warfare Command, Identification Division. State your inquiry. Lindquist straightened in her chair. Yeah, this is Sergeant Rue Lindquist, Metro PD District 9. We have a suspect in custody claiming military service. Navy SEAL. No identification on her. Just running a routine verification. There was a pause, longer than normal. Describe the individual. Lindquist glanced at her notes. Female, Caucasian, early 30s, approximately 5'6". Slim build, maybe 120 pounds. Dark hair, shoulder length. Surgical scar on her left forearm. She's refusing to give a name. Another pause. This one felt different. The voice changed, colder and more urgent. Stand by. The line went silent. Not hold music. Just dead air. Lindquist stared at the phone, confused. In 22 years, she'd never had a verification call go like this. She was about to hang up when the line clicked back on. Different voice, higher rank. Sergeant Lindquist. Do not process that individual. Do not move her. Secure her location immediately. We're inbound. Wait, what? Who is this? The line went dead. Lindquist's heart was pounding. She set the phone down slowly and walked to the holding room window. The woman was still sitting in silence, head bowed, hands folded. Creel walked past, grinning. She crack yet. Lindquist didn't answer. Something was very, very wrong. And then the phones started ringing. All of them. Every desk phone in the precinct lit up simultaneously. Officers answered, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. Lindquist's radio crackled. All units, this is dispatch. Federal advisory. District 9 is under temporary communications hold. No media contact, no social media posts. Effective immediately. Officers froze mid-conversation. Tambor looked up from his phone. The hell does that mean? Before anyone could answer, the precinct doors locked. Automatic deadbolts engaged with a heavy metallic sound that echoed through the building. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Outside, 3 black SUVs pulled up. No lights, no sirens. Just controlled, deliberate arrival. Men in full tactical gear stepped out. Rifles slung across their chests, helmets with no insignia. They moved like a machine, forming a perimeter. And behind them, a tall man in a naval officer's uniform emerged, commander's insignia on his chest. Ribbons Lindquist couldn't identify. His face was carved stone. Creel moved to the window. Who the hell is that? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. The man walked directly toward the precinct entrance. An officer at the door tried to stop him. Sir, you can't just... The man flashed a badge. Defense Intelligence Agency credentials. The officer stepped back like he'd been struck. The man scanned the booking area. His eyes landed on the woman through the holding room window. His entire body went rigid. He turned to the nearest officer, Tambor, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. Who cuffed her? Tambor stammered. I did, sir, but she was resisting and... The man cut him off. Where is the arresting officer? Every eye in the precinct was on him now. The chaos had stopped. The phones had gone quiet. The drunk in the corner cell had even stopped yelling. The man strode directly to Creel's desk. Creel stood, trying to assert authority, trying to act like he was still in control. "Commander, I don't know what you've been told, but this woman was impersonating military personnel. We have witnesses." The man cut him off. "Show me her intake form." Creel hesitated, then handed it over. The man scanned it, jaw tightening with every line. He looked at the section marked Belongings, saw the silver ring listed. His face went white. The ring. "Where is it?" Lindquist pointed to the evidence locker. The man retrieved it and held it under the light, examining the inside band. There was an engraving so small it was almost invisible. His hand closed around it. His knuckles went white. He turned back to Creel. His voice dropped to a lethal calm. "Do you have any idea what you've done? If you've ever misjudged someone based on what you could see, share that moment below. And if you want to see how this ends, subscribe, because what happens next will change everything these officers thought they knew." Creel tried to defend himself, his voice rising with forced confidence. She refused to provide identification. She wouldn't answer basic questions. She fits every profile of someone trying to steal military honor. The man, Commander Gideon Vaux, according to the nameplate on his uniform, didn't blink. "She can't carry identification." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Creel's mouth opened, then closed. Vaux continued, each syllable precise and measured. "That woman you just humiliated, cuffed, and paraded around like a criminal does not exist. Not in any database you have access to, not in any public record, because her entire operational history is classified under Title 50 authority." The room had gone silent. Officers who moments ago were joking and filing paperwork now stood frozen, watching. Tambor's phone was still in his hand, screen dark. Lindquist felt her stomach drop. Vaux turned to address the entire precinct, his voice carrying to every corner. "You want to know who you arrested? Her call sign is Iron Reaper. She's a Tier 1 SEAL operator, 11 confirmed high-value eliminations across 4 continents. She survived an extraction in Kandahar that killed 6 of her teammates and left her with injuries that should have ended her career." Tambor's face had gone pale, the surgical scar, the one he'd dismissed as cosmetic surgery. The weight of that realization was visible in his expression. Vaux wasn't finished. "She has more combat decorations than this entire precinct combined. And you'll never see a single one because they're sealed under Presidential Executive Order." His gaze swept across the officers, landing on each face for just long enough to make them uncomfortable. The silence was suffocating. Creel tried to salvage something, anything. How were we supposed to know? She wouldn't cooperate. Vaux stepped closer, his voice dropping to something even more dangerous than anger. She was here on a classified counterintelligence operation, tracking a naval officer suspected of leaking classified information to foreign assets. That bar you pulled her out of was her target's known location. He paused, letting the implications sink in. "You didn't just arrest a fake SEAL detective. You blew a 6-month federal operation." The weight of those words settled over the precinct like ash. Lindquist looked through the holding room window. The woman, Iron Reaper, hadn't moved. She sat in the same position, head bowed, hands folded. But now, Lindquist saw it differently. The stillness wasn't submission. It was control. The kind of control that comes from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. The kind that makes silence a weapon instead of a weakness. Vaux pulled a phone from his pocket and made a call, his eyes never leaving Creel. "This is Vaux. I need a full operational scrub on the Mulligan's location. Asset was compromised by local law enforcement." He listened for a moment. Affirmative. Federal review of all involved personnel. He hung up and turned back to Creel. "The arresting officers are under federal investigation. Your precinct captain will be contacted within the hour. Your body cameras, dash cameras, and any personal recordings will be seized as evidence." Tambor's hand moved instinctively to his pocket where his phone was. Vaux noticed. "That video you took, officer. Hand it over. Now." Tambor's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and unlocked it. He navigated to his gallery, found the video, and his finger hovered over the delete button. Vaux's voice cut through his hesitation. "Don't. That's destruction of federal evidence. Hand me the device." Tambor did. his career flashing before his eyes in the seconds it took to pass the phone over. Lindquist found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Sir, I was the one who called for verification." "I didn't know." Vo's expression softened slightly when he looked at her. "You followed protocol, Sergeant. That's the only reason this didn't become a larger incident. But the damage is done." He looked back at the holding room. "She's been in custody for 47 minutes. 47 minutes where her cover was exposed, her target potentially alerted, and months of intelligence work compromised." He walked toward the holding room, and the crowd of officers parted without being asked. Lindquist followed at a distance, compelled by something she couldn't name. Guilt, maybe, or the need to understand. Vo opened the door and stepped inside. The woman, Iron Reaper, didn't look up immediately. Vo stood there for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost gentle. "Reaper?" She looked up. Her eyes were exhausted, haunted, not by fear, but by something deeper, the kind of weariness that comes from carrying weight no one else can see. Vo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He knelt in front of her and unlocked the handcuffs himself, removing them with care. The red marks on her wrists were deeper than Lindquist had realized. Reaper rubbed her wrists slowly, methodically, but said nothing. Vo stood and extended his hand, not to shake, to help her up. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. As she rose, Lindquist saw her fully for the first time. Thin, yes, but not fragile. There was a coiled tension in the way she moved, economy of motion, nothing wasted. Her eyes scanned the room beyond Vo's shoulder, taking in exits, positions, threats. It was instinctive, automatic. Vo led her out of the holding room and into the booking area. Every officer was watching now, cameras off, phones down. The SEAL operators who had entered with Vo stood at attention near the entrance, a silent wall of tactical precision. In the center of the room, Vo stopped. He turned to face Reaper, and then, slowly and deliberately, he brought his hand up in a crisp military salute. The 6 SEAL operators behind him followed in perfect unison, full tactical gear, rifles slung, all saluting a woman in jeans and a faded jacket. The gesture carried more weight than any words could. It was respect, recognition, acknowledgement of sacrifice that would never be made public. Vo held the salute for 5 full seconds. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant wail of a siren outside. When he lowered his hand, Vo didn't speak to Reaper. He turned to the assembled officers, his voice carrying the full authority of his rank and experience. "You want to know why she didn't defend herself? Why she didn't tell you who she was?" He paused, making sure every word landed. "Because operators like her don't need your validation. They don't need your belief. They've already paid a price you'll never understand." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver ring, holding it for a moment before handing it to her. Reaper took it and slid it onto her finger without looking at it. The motion was practiced, familiar, a ritual performed countless times. Lindquist could see the engraving now in the light. Reaper 6. NDAA 2019. She didn't know what it meant, but she understood it was significant, a marker of something beyond her clearance, beyond her world. Lindquist stepped forward before she could stop herself. The words came out quietly, but they felt necessary. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, we didn't know." Reaper turned to look at her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice hoarse from disuse, she spoke 3 words. "You weren't supposed to." The statement wasn't accusatory. It was factual. Matter of fact. People like her didn't exist on paper. They didn't get parades or medals or recognition. They operated in shadows. They sacrificed everything, and no one ever knew. That was the job. That was the cost. Lindquist felt the weight of it settle in her chest like a stone. Reaper turned toward the exit. The SEAL team formed around her, a protective formation born from years of operating together. Vo looked back at Creel one final time. "Your body camera footage, your arrest report, and your testimony will be reviewed by federal investigators. Depending on what they find, you may face charges for obstruction of a federal operation." He let that sink in. "And detective, you didn't catch a fake. You caught Iron Reaper. That's a mistake you'll carry for the rest of your career." Outside, the black SUVs were idling. News vans had tried to approach, but were being turned away at the perimeter by federal agents in suits. The lockdown was still in effect. No information in, no information out. Reaper walked down the precinct steps, flanked by operators who moved with the same controlled precision she did. Just before she reached the lead vehicle, she stopped, turned, looked back at the precinct. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes swept across the building, the officers visible through the windows, the place that had treated her like a criminal. Then she climbed into the SUV without a word. The door closed. The convoy pulled away, disappearing into the night like it had never been there at all. Inside, officers stood in stunned silence. Tambor stared at his empty hand where his phone had been. Creel sat at his desk, replaying every word he'd said, every joke, every dismissive comment. Lindquist walked back to her desk and picked up the intake form. She stared at the blank spaces. No name, no address, no emergency contact. She picked up a pen and wrote under notes. Verified, classified operator, federal jurisdiction, case closed. She filed it away, knowing it would be shredded by morning. The precinct slowly returned to motion, but the energy had changed. The chaos of a Friday night felt muted now, distant. Officers processed paperwork mechanically, avoiding eye contact with each other. No one spoke about what had happened. No one knew how. Lindquist sat at her desk, the silver ring still vivid in her memory. Reaper 6. She opened her computer and, against her better judgment, typed the identifier into a search engine. Access denied, classified. She tried a personnel database. No results found. She tried another. Nothing. It was like searching for a ghost. And that's when she understood. Iron Reaper wasn't just classified, she was erased. Have you ever realized too late that you completely misjudged someone? Drop your story in the comments. And if you're still watching, hit subscribe, because the conclusion will show you exactly what happens when respect is finally given to someone who never asked for it. The convoy disappeared into the city, taillights fading into the grid of streetlights and traffic signals that stretched toward the horizon. Inside the lead SUV, Iron Reaper sat in silence, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The silver ring caught the passing light from outside, glinting briefly before falling back into shadow. The SEAL operator in the passenger seat glanced back at her through the rearview mirror, but said nothing. There was nothing to say. She'd been compromised. The operation was burned. 6 months of surveillance, intelligence gathering, and careful positioning had unraveled in 47 minutes because of a bar fight and a pair of handcuffs. Commander Vo sat beside her, his jaw tight. He hadn't spoken since they left the precinct. Finally, he broke the silence. The target's been notified. He's in the wind. Reaper didn't react. Her face remained impassive, eyes focused somewhere beyond the window. Vo continued, frustration leaking into his voice despite his best efforts. We had him. 1 more week and we'd have had enough to move. Now he knows we're watching. He'll scrub everything. Go dark. Maybe permanently. Reaper's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. It wasn't the officer's fault. Vo turned sharply. Like hell it wasn't. They arrested a federal operator in the middle of an active mission. They humiliated you. They put you on display like some stolen valor fraud. Reaper shook her head slightly. They didn't know. They couldn't have known. That's the point. She looked at him then, her eyes tired but steady. If our covers were obvious, they wouldn't work. We're supposed to be invisible. That means to everyone, even the people trying to help. Vo leaned back, the tension in his shoulders not quite releasing. The silence stretched between them. The operator driving took a turn onto the highway, merging smoothly into late-night traffic. Reaper closed her eyes. The exhaustion was setting in now. The adrenaline that had kept her level during the arrest, the processing, the interrogation, was draining away. What remained was bone-deep weariness, the kind that came from years of operating on the edge, never fully resting, never fully safe. Back at District 9, Lindquist was still at her desk. Most of the other officers had found reasons to be elsewhere, processing rooms, patrol routes, anywhere that wasn't the booking area where it had happened. Creel sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen without seeing it. His arrest record, once a source of pride, now felt like evidence against him. Every commendation, every case closed, all of it overshadowed by the one time he'd been catastrophically wrong. Tambor stood near the evidence locker, arms crossed, replaying the moment he'd filmed her, the mockery in his voice, the certainty that she was lying, the casual cruelty of treating someone's claimed service as a punchline. His phone was gone, seized as evidence, but the memory of what he'd recorded remained. He wondered if federal investigators would watch it, if they'd see him the way he now saw himself, as someone who'd mistaken silence for guilt and dignity for deception. The precinct captain arrived an hour later, accompanied by 2 federal agents in dark suits. They went directly to Lindquist's office, closing the door behind them. Through the glass, officers could see the conversation. Lindquist's expression, the captain's increasing pallor, the agent's clinical detachment. When they emerged 20 minutes later, the captain addressed the room. Everyone involved in the arrest or processing of the individual brought in earlier tonight is to provide a full written statement. No details are to be shared outside this building. All social media posts, photos, or videos related to this incident are to be reported immediately. This is not a request. Creel started to speak, then thought better of it. The captain's expression made it clear that questions wouldn't be entertained. The federal agents left without another word, taking copies of every document, every log entry, every piece of evidence related to the arrest. When they were gone, the precinct felt smaller somehow, diminished. Lindquist went home that night, but didn't sleep. She kept seeing the woman's face, the blankness that she'd mistaken for evasion, the silence she'd interpreted as guilt, and then the moment Vo had said her call sign, Iron Reaper, 11 confirmed eliminations, Kandahar extraction, presidential executive order. The words looped in her mind, each repetition adding weight. She'd spent 22 years learning to read people, to spot lies, to find truth in inconsistency, and she'd failed the most important test. She'd looked at a warrior and seen a fraud. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the precinct, official Navy letterhead, addressed to Sergeant Rue Lindquist. She opened it in private, her hand steadier than she expected. The contents were brief, a formal acknowledgement of her role in verifying the individual in question, a notation that her actions followed proper protocol and likely prevented a worse outcome, and a final line that made her pause. Your discretion and professionalism during a sensitive situation are noted and appreciated. It was signed by someone whose rank she had to look up, Vice Admiral, Naval Special Warfare Command. She read it 3 times, then filed it away. It felt like forgiveness, though she wasn't sure she deserved it. Creel and Tambor received different letters, notification of federal review, pending investigation, potential charges under obstruction statutes. Their union representatives were already involved. Lawyers had been contacted. The machinery of consequence had begun turning, and there was no stopping it. Weeks passed. The story never made the news. No leaks, no social media exposure. It was as if the arrest had never happened, scrubbed from existence as thoroughly as Iron Reaper herself had been scrubbed from public record. Officers at District 9 didn't talk about it, but everyone knew. The knowledge hung in the air like humidity before a storm, unspoken but ever present. Lindquist found herself thinking about the silver ring, the way Reaper had slid it onto her finger without looking, muscle memory, ritual. She wondered how many times that ring had been removed for operations, how many times it had been returned, how many operators never got theirs back. The thought sat heavy in her chest. One evening, months after the incident, Lindquist was leaving the precinct when she noticed something. A woman standing across the street near a coffee shop, face partially obscured by the collar of her jacket. Thin build, dark hair. For a moment, their eyes met. Lindquist's breath caught, but then the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the evening foot traffic. Lindquist stood there for a long time, unsure if she'd actually seen her or if guilt and memory had conjured a ghost. She never knew that Iron Reaper had been standing there, that she'd watched the precinct for 10 minutes, observing the rhythms of shift change, the patterns of personnel movement, old habits. The operation was dead, but her instincts remained. She'd wanted to see it again, the place where she'd been most exposed, most vulnerable, not out of anger or desire for confrontation, but because understanding a place meant understanding how to operate around it, how to avoid it, how to ensure it never happened again. Reaper walked 3 blocks before getting into an unmarked sedan. Vo was driving. New assignment, he said without preamble. Different city. different target, same mission. Reaper nodded, settling into the passenger seat. The silver ring caught the dashboard light. She turned it absently with her thumb, a gesture she wasn't aware of making. Vo noticed but said nothing. They drove in silence, leaving District 9 behind. Back at the precinct, Lindquist finally went home. She poured a glass of water and sat in her kitchen, the house quiet around her. She thought about the intake form, the blank spaces where a life should have been, the absence of identity that had seemed suspicious but was actually protection. Camouflage, the same instinct that made animals blend into their environment. Except Reaper's environment was shadows and silence and missions no one would ever read about. Lindquist wondered how many others there were, how many people moved through the world carrying secrets that heavy, how many had sacrificed pieces of themselves, their identities, their recognitions, so that others could sleep safely. She'd never know their names, never see their faces. That was the point. But now she'd carry the knowledge that they existed, that they were real, that silence wasn't always guilt. The next morning, she returned to work, filed reports, processed arrests, answered calls. The routine was familiar, comforting in its predictability. But something had shifted. She looked at people differently now, listened more carefully, questioned her assumptions. The woman in the faded jacket had taught her that, not through words but through presence, through the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned respect but never demanded it. Years later, Lindquist would retire from the force. At her retirement party, someone would ask about her most memorable case. She'd pause, considering. Then she'd smile and say something vague about learning that the truth isn't always obvious, that sometimes the people who deserve recognition the most are the ones who'll never ask for it. No one would press for details, but Lindquist would think about a silver ring, a blank intake form, and 3 words spoken in a voice hoarse from disuse. You weren't supposed to. She never forgot Iron Reaper, and she never stopped looking for her in crowds, in shadows, in the spaces between what people said and what they meant. She never saw her again, but somewhere, she knew, Reaper was still operating, still invisible, still carrying weight no one else could see, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. If this story made you think differently about the people around you, about the sacrifices others make in silence, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, even when the names and faces must remain hidden, consider subscribing. Because respect isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. And sometimes that's when it matters most.